Hello, I'm Dr. Paul Cleveland with Boundary Stone, and what I want to talk to you about today is the concept of natural law. This is really an important concept. It's the very basis behind which our founding documents were written and on which our constitutional form of government was established. And the concept is pretty straightforward. Is this that we live in a created order. That is, God has created an ordered universe, and it operates on fixed principles. And we can see those principles like gravitational pull, those sorts of things. Those are part of the natural workings of the universe in which we live. But it goes deeper than that. And the essence, when we think about the political system at work, and we think about the natural law, God's also created a moral order, or a natural moral order that we should uphold. And in a kind of one form, we put it this way, that all individuals are created equal in the sense that they are endowed with certain rights, namely the right to life, liberty, and property. And those kind of follow, and we see that also repeated in the Ten Commandments. You see, don't steal, don't murder, don't lie, don't cheat. Those sorts of principles are embedded in the Ten Commandments as well. And so we have a revealed statement from God about the moral order as well as just in practice. And so when the founders were establishing America as the United States of America, as a nation, they wanted to found the nation based upon those natural principles. Now, they didn't do it completely, and there were some failures involved in what they were doing. For example, the chattel slavery was a huge failure that went antithetical to to the concept of natural law. And now we got to be a little careful here, because if we think about slavery in time, there are really two different forms that we see that have been at work. One form is where it is called indentured servitude, and that would occur when someone, say, entered into a contract or borrowed money from somebody else and later was simply unable to repay it. And so the only way in which they could repay the debt they owed was to pledge to work it off, in essence, for somebody else and become their servant in that sense. And in ancient times, that would have been referred to as slavery. Now, chattel slavery is different. Chattel slavery is actually selling someone to someone else and trying to own someone as if someone were purchasing a cow or even a pet, a dog or a cat or something to this effect. So chattel slavery is totally antithetical to the natural law. You can't sell people. If natural rights have any meaning at all, they have to apply equally to every person. And so to try to sell people would be a violation of this. Now, with that said, we can dig deeper. Of course, we think about the right to life. Every human being would have their right to their personhood, to their lives. And every human being would have the right to choose, to make choices for themselves about how to live their lives and how to go about doing things in this world. And then finally, the very nature of who it is that we are produces property. We can't help but do that because we live in a physical world and we all have physical needs to survive. And so when we engage the world, we are going to produce property. It's the very essence of who we are. And of course, our first property ownerships would be more or less ourselves, our labor, that we could sell it to someone else and serve somebody else's purpose for a price. So that concept is embedded in the natural law. And so when we think about the concept of the rule of law within the concept of natural law, which all the founders would agree with, we see right away what they meant was that legislatures should never institute or legislate a law that is in violation with the natural order of things. And any law thus written by its very nature becomes illegitimate. And of course, we've seen abuses here. I've already mentioned the problem of the slave trade in the United States. Major abuse. And in fact, they tried to uphold this one for a very long time, even the Supreme Court with the Dred Scott decision that you've read about in Basic American Government is an illustration of this, where there have been abuses of people under the law. Well, what you do in such cases, well, you get rid of those laws. Those laws should not apply that. They ought not have been instituted in the first place, and wherever they're found, they should be eliminated. And that's the way you would deal with illegitimate law. Now, what has been happening, though, in the United States is a drift away from this and a drift towards what we call legal positivism. And legal positivism says, well, no, the rule of law is whatever we should decide it should be. In other words, we're going to elevate man's law above God's law and work off of it. And that your obedience to the law then should be according to whatever has been legislated, instead of in accordance with God's moral law. Those are two very different things, and so when you go off on that direction, there are consequences. In other words, just like there are consequences to violating the law of gravity. In other words, I can't go to a very tall building and just presume that if I step off the edge of that building, there are no consequences. No, there's a very big consequence to pay. I'm going to go straight down to my death in that case. Now, with the moral order, we live in a world of grace. God is being very gracious to us. The fact that we were able as sinners to get up in the morning, as Jonathan Edwards would put it, is amazing, that he didn't just send us to hell immediately, sinners that we are. And so God is very gracious to us, and we can go a long way in setting aside the moral order without necessarily paying immediate consequences. But now, that doesn't mean that the consequences won't eventually come. They will. And when they do come, oftentimes we're surprised, and we really shouldn't be surprised at all. So there are going to be consequences to pay when a nation begins to elevate man's law above God's law, and in ways that are against God's law. In other words, if we vote for such things as the redistribution of private property, in other words, taking from someone by force to give to somebody else, well, it's tantamount to legalized theft. And there are eventual consequences to be paid for doing such things as this. And we will pay them in time. Rest assured, I mean, I think God in His Word has told us this, that you will reap what you've sown, and we will reap the negative consequences in time in this nation when we begin to depart from our concept of natural law towards a path of raising man's law above God's law. Well, I hope this is helpful to you as you complete your studies in American government, and we'll talk about a few other things at another time. See you later.